We are now a nation where people hate each other. We are now a nation where we are no longer apparently capable of debating serious public policy without immediately concluding that the person that disagrees with you is evil. This can't continue.
Florida remains one of the most interesting states in America, comprised mostly of people who were born someplace else, have their sporting passions back north, still remember something called snow removal, and speak so many varied languages that far too often the only way to be understood is to scream at the top of your lungs and hope somebody gets the drift. Politically speaking, it's the last stand for the hometown kid. Could be a hammer for the billionaire interloper. And if you interrupted any of these conversations with how the Miami Dolphins may have been hosed in their recent deal with the Philadelphia Eagles, you might not wander back to politics until training camp. All right. Last day for POTUS primary training camp. Welcome back the Associate Professor of Political Science at the University of Miami, Joseph Uscinski, joined by Director of the Political Campaigning Program at the University of Florida, Stephen Craig. Welcome, professors. You are allowed to toss in a U or gator chomp at the appropriate moments, but only once. After that, it is going to be a shunning. All right. Professor Craig, let's go ahead and begin with you and talk about Marco Rubio here for the moment here. The hometown kid, why, not if he's going to, but why has he failed so badly in his own state?
Well, he really hasn't caught on fire anywhere. So the fact that he hasn't caught on fire here, I suppose, is just part of the pattern. He's a young guy. He hasn't he's got a solid grounding policy wise. He's charismatic and all that, but the song he's playing, the tune he's humming, is just not one that's really caught much fire in this particular election year.
So then, Professor Uscinski, let's take that as granted. He did really never caught fire. What did he do wrong? Was it just the fact that he didn't show up for a lot of his votes? Did a lot of that negativity get to him? Too young, too good looking? What is it?
Well, I think in Florida specifically, it would have been different if he was governor rather than senator. I mean, senators we send up to Washington. We weren't going to hear that much from him except through the national news. I mean, sure, he's kept some ties here, but it's different very different than in the case of Ohio, where you have Kasich, who's there on the ground all the time. But nationally speaking, Rubio's only claim to fame is that he's a Republican. He rode that Tea Party wave in 2010, did very well because of it, but then when he got to D.C., he didn't want to caucus with the Tea Party. He didn't take the same stance on immigration that a lot of the other Republicans did. He got involved in that Gang of Eight. So no one really knows who he is, and he's kind of sang a different tune, depending on who's paying him to play it.
So then, Professor Craig, back to you. Seeing that he will likely fail in the Florida primary on Tuesday, Ted Cruz has been making some inroads here, and there are some people saying that if only Marco Rubio would have gotten out at this point, before now, that they would have been able to defeat Donald Trump. Do you think that might have been the case, or simply put, is Trump just such the quote-unquote phenomenon you couldn't stop him if you tried?
Well, that's overstating it because, I mean, the numbers that I've seen from polls have him in the 40s, the low 40s, low to mid 40s. That's not an overwhelming mandate. And I think it would be jumping the gun to think that everyone who might have voted or will be voting for Rubio would otherwise have gone to Cruz. I don't think that's necessarily the case, but clearly his staying in the race has made things more difficult for Cruz as he seeks to become the alternative.
So, Professor Uscinski, I'll come to you then on this one. Is it just possible? And again, look, let's deal in possibilities here. We look at all these numbers here that Ted Cruz might sneak out a win here, that maybe Donald Trump is fallible and can be caught in Florida. It doesn't seem that way.
Well, anything's possible, and given the events of the last few days, maybe there are a large group of voters who find, the riots and the protests, distasteful, and they don't want to nominate somebody who's going to draw that kind of ire from the other side. But on the other hand, Florida's already been voting for a little while now, so it's tough to know what exactly might happen or what might trigger a Cruz victory.
Professor Craig, what happened to Florida over the years? Because when I was very young, I think this is back in the 1700s, I remember at a time when Florida was actually very Republican. And as a matter of fact, the Latino culture really went mostly Republican. When and why did it change? Because it seems to be very left now in many cases.
Oh, it's not left, but it's very diverse. Among other things, you mentioned the Latin population. Newer generations of Cubans are not as Republican as their elders, and we've had a tremendous influx of Puerto Ricans in recent years, and they definitely tend to be to the left of the Cubans. So that's part of it. It's generational turnover. Younger Floridians, like younger voters throughout the country, are more to the left, more Democratic. And as it is, I mean, let's not overstate either way. This is a purple state. It's not a red or a blue state.
So, Professor Uscinski, I got about 30 seconds to you, and also I'll come back to you, Professor Craig, in a moment. But, Professor Uscinski, North versus South versus West, is it not fair to say that Florida is really a three-area state, if you will, very different voting if you go from that south to west to north?
Well, Florida is very big and it's very diverse. And down here where I am in Miami, we're almost like an offshoot of Cuba. You have lots of Cubans here, a very large Cuban population. But even within that, you have the older Cuban population, which is very Republican. Then you have this South Beach thing that's going on that's very liberal. If you go further up north into Broward County, you start to become, more white and less Latino. And it starts to look more like the old South the further north you go. So there's a lot going on here. I think Florida is a very interesting bellwether, and I think how it goes, it might tell us a lot about how the rest of the country goes.
Professor Craig, 15 seconds to you on the Democratic side of things. Do you think Bernie Sanders has a really good shot here to upend Hillary Clinton?
In the other states, maybe. Those appear to be close. But in Florida, we got a closed primary, and I think that's definitely going to play to Clinton's advantage.
Gentlemen, I want to give you both credit because we've talked about Gators and Canes here, and nobody has bothered to throw down a gauntlet. There it is. See, I knew it. Professor Craig, there it is. We had to get at least the U and the chomp in there now to know that we're heading for the fall. It works perfectly. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining us. All right, don't forget, join us Tuesday night. Our election coverage, America Votes 2016, begins live, 6 o'clock all night long. We'll bring you all the results right here on Newsmax.